In this video, you'll learn how to change the timeline frame rate for your project. We'll walk through it step by step, and I'll also explain what the setting actually does so you know you're choosing the right option for your needs. First, make sure you have your project open. If you've just launched your editing software and you're on the project selection screen, go ahead and open the project you want to adjust. It's important that you're inside the correct project before you change these settings, because the frame rate you choose will apply to this specific timeline. Once your project is open and you're looking at your main workspace, head up to the top menu bar and click on File. This is where you'll find most of the key project-related options. From the File menu, look for Project Settings. Depending on your layout, you might also see a small gear icon in the bottom right corner of the interface that opens the same window. Either method works, so choose whichever is easier for you. Now, the goal is to open the Project Settings window. And when the Project Settings window appears, you'll see several sections or tabs. Make sure you're in the Master Settings section. This is where the overall configuration for your project lives, including resolution timelines and, of course, your timeline frame rate. Now, look for the option labeled Timeline Frame Rate. This is the setting that controls how many frames per second your timeline is set to play back and export. In other words, it defines the speed or smoothness baseline of your project. It's different from your monitor's refresh rate or your playback quality. The timeline frame rate is baked into how your footage will ultimately be processed. Click on the Timeline Frame Rate drop-down or field and choose your desired frame rate. Common choices are 24 frames per second for a more cinematic look, 25 frames per second, which is standard in many regions that follow PAL broadcast standards, and 30 frames per second, which is often used for online content, presentations, and general purpose videos. Pick the one that matches either how you shot your footage or how you plan to deliver your final video. If you're not sure which to choose, a good rule of thumb is to match the majority of your source clips. For example, if most of your footage was recorded at 24 frames per second, set your timeline frame rate to 24. This helps minimize issues like judder or awkward motion caused by frame conversions later on. Once you've selected the frame rate you want, take a moment to double check that it's correct, because in many editing workflows, changing the timeline frame rate after you've started heavy editing can be tricky and may require rebuilding timelines or re-importing clips. It's always best to lock this in early in your project. After confirming your choice, click Save at the bottom of the project settings window. This applies your new timeline frame rate to the project. The window will close and you'll be returned to your main editing work.